Hello and welcome to another edition of Suddenly Autistic with me, Amanda Foxon-Hill. I was diagnosed as autistic in my mid-40s and I'm now in my late 40s. So it's been relatively recent, but long enough to know that it's a difficult thing to go through. In that last period of time, there's been quite a lot of people in my situation, i.e. late diagnosed, on the internet sharing their stories. And it's really interesting to see the similarities and the differences between different individuals, at what point in their life they're getting diagnosed, or they're seeking a diagnosis or accepting a self-diagnosis, and how that's panning out for them. So I think this is, well, I know that this is a space that will grow and grow, because there's such a it's been so fast, the change in society's acceptance of autism, of understanding what it is, and of access to support in terms of at least starting to assess either yourself or get yourself assessed for autism. This doesn't mean that everybody's going to be autistic. It's not true that everybody's a little autistic. You're either autistic or you're not. You just have different levels of support needs and a different profile. There's many different profiles that come with autism. I have been classified as autism support needs level 1, which is the lowest support needs, but that doesn't mean I have a light version of autism, or I'm only a little bit autistic. I am fully autistic all the way through, and it's more to do with I suppose it's the wiring of my brain and my body, how my brain and my body, or how I understand myself, how I process information coming in, and how I push it out, how I communicate with other people and how I relate to other people, my relational needs, my attachment needs, that kind of thing. Sensory, all sorts. There's a lot to it. So if you are new to this and you're new to watching this blog, well, welcome. But that's a little bit about me. Along with my autism, I also have complex PTSD, generalized anxiety disorder, and ADHD. So I'm an ADHD-er. And I do see that those 4 different things affect me in different ways, and they make up the complex reality that is my own, my unique reality. In this video, I want to talk about growth and change, because for the last few times I have spoke about some pretty downy topics, really, about how things have been difficult and the trauma and the struggles of being an autistic person. The reason that comes to the top, I think, for me, is because it's a huge thing. It's hugely disabling to be traumatized in this world, and to have a lot of things where you don't feel safe either in your body or in the external world. So it really is pervasive in its effect. However, it's not I don't want my life to be defined around trauma and difficulties. I want my life to be defined around the whole narrative, I'd say. I don't want it not to be that. That's part of it, but I think there's more to life. There's more to my life than just that. And in fact, sometimes those difficulties inform the good things. So I want to explore all of that, and now it's time for the good. So this is growth and change. I was feeling pretty good about myself over the last couple of weeks, and indeed I still am, and recognised that I had a little extra capacity. And this was a bit exciting for me, because for so long, for so many years now, I have really felt like I'm sort of going through the motions, trying to get boxes ticked in terms of what I need to do in the day and in the week. You know, your responsibilities, your duties, the things that you just, that you value, like keeping the house clean, myself, organised, whatever. So for many years in the recent past, I have struggled to really get excited about extra things, the cherry on the top of the cake of life. And when I'm talking about extras and the cherry on the top of the cake, I'm talking about things like, I don't know, maybe going out for dinner to a proper restaurant. And when I say that's a very entitled thing, but I mean, it's easy to go out of the house and get food in a takeaway or something like that. It's a bigger difference if you're going out and actually eating and enjoying the situation of eating in a restaurant, even if it's not a particularly fancy restaurant. That's a whole different ballgame. So that's what I'm talking about. It starts off with things like that, feeling a bit more comfortable about that, and that's something you can do, especially when that eating place is new. And there's there's been other things too, like the idea of going away on a holiday that maybe takes a little bit more planning than just popping in the car and off you go for a few days. What else could there be? Cinema, events. It could be having friends over, going out to friends, organising parties, things like that. Again, these things don't have to be big and fancy. They can be on quite a small level, but for the last few years I felt a little bit like my glass is too empty, or my spoons have ran out, you know, the spoon analogy, and that wasn't something that I really had a lot of extra time for. But now I do feel like I do. And one of the things that I have I suddenly found myself wanting to do again was get out on my bike. So I did that this week. And one of the motivations for getting out on my bike was that I wanted to go along to a social group that's a few kilometres away from us. So it's about 8.5k, so you know, there and back would just be under, if you said just under 20 kilometers there and back off-road, so a little bit mountain bikey, I could get there on my bike. So I was thinking, right, I kind of want to do this social group. I'd love to get back out on my bike. I'm going to try those, and I put them both into this week. So that's what I did. Plus I've been working this week. I've had a couple of events, one last week, one late last week, one on Friday this week. So it's been a relatively busy work time too. So I guess you could say I've gone from having a very quiet life to having quite a full and rich life in 1 week. And yes, that did come back to bite me a little bit. Getting back on my bike was such a joyful experience. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoy that feeling of getting your body to work, even though it felt really awkward, and it made me realise how unfit I've become. Because what would usually be, or what used to be quite easy for me, is now quite a chore. I found myself getting off on some of the hills and not really being confident about taking some of the tighter turns, and especially going down steps. You know, this sort of thing that the average person who perhaps wasn't a mountain bike rider would look at me and go, wow, you're doing great. And I understand that, but for me, who was used to racing and going quite fast and for quite long distance, like doing a 50k race for example, now to be struggling and feeling exhausted after, you know, 8.5k's each way felt a little bit like not great. However, overall I did feel really good about myself, and I noticed in my body the difference, how it feels to have that physical exhilaration again and pushing yourself, even though it did make me feel like my lungs were bleeding in parts, which is a terrible feeling, but it's partly because of the cold air. It's actually quite cold here, but the bike was a good idea. Now I was going to take my bike, and I did take my bike to the meeting that I went to the social meeting. So this week I tried out a social group for neurodiverse adults, and particularly people identifying as women, because it was at a women's health centre. So I went along to that, and that was a very interesting experience. What I noticed this time, because I've not really been in a position where I've been trying lots of new things. I've been very aware of my own neurodiversity and my own needs, and I've actually had time to consider everything. So this is almost like a first for me, a new situation in life for me, that I am able to see myself doing and preparing and being in this moment. So that's quite something, I feel. But I really noticed myself, the amount of energy and effort and time it was taking for me to plan for this social event, which was actually quite casual and, you know, drop in, drop out, not really, no dramas. But for me, it had become quite a chore. So I decided I was going to get there on my bike. Then we had to get the bike done up, which my husband helped with. Then I did a practice run. So I actually took the bike and did the there and back the day before to see how long it would take me, whether I was capable, make sure I understood where I was going, so I'm not stressed about going the wrong way, all of that. I also was then considering, what clothes am I going to wear? What bag do I need to take? What do I need in my bag? You know, where am I going to leave the bike? What do I do if something goes wrong? You know, where am I going to put my phone? Is it going to fit in my pocket? What am I going to do with the dog? Lots and lots of things were going through. I was mapping, modelling and scenario planning this whole day for a good couple of days before the event. And I realised how exhausting that was. That was actually really exhausting. But at the time, so when I was doing this earlier on this week, I didn't really consider it as being too exhausting. It just felt like my normal, and indeed it is my normal. But now I'm aware of what my normal is. It is a lot of work. So eventually it became the time to get on my bike and get to this meeting, and I did that. Everything went well, the trip went well, locked my bike up, went inside. This is the first time for me visiting this location and visiting this group, so there was a fair amount of anxiety in my body. I wasn't really sure, but I've been to new places a lot in my life. I've had a career where part of my job was going out visiting clients and going into new situations, so the newness and the novelty and the being slightly out of place in those, there was feelings that I understood and are very used to. What I'm less used to is being a vulnerable user of a facility, if you like. So going along to something that's set up for people who have a vulnerability or a certain I suppose situationship, I like to call them, like your neurodiversity, your trauma, your whatever. So that is less, I'm less comfortable with that yet, because I'm not really sure how. There's a different expectation. So turning up to an event in work mode is very, very different, because there's a script, there's a role, you know what is expected of you, you know what you're sort of aiming to get out of the meeting. Going along to a mental health setting, really, as a participant in an event that I'm not really sure, actually, because one of the things that I actually realised I didn't research very well is actually what this group was about and how it was going to run. I actually didn't give that any thought at all. I saw it online. I was like, oh yeah, okay, a group for women who are on the spectrum. Perfect, off we'll go. And then I focused on all this other stuff. So actually when I came in and the lady who I assumed was the facilitator was saying things like, oh, and what brings you here? What do you hope to get out of today? I actually said, I don't know. I don't know why I'm here, actually. And I felt that is exactly what I said, and I felt very honest in saying that, because it was true. I didn't really know. I actually hadn't thought about it. Do I want more friends? Well, not really. Am I social? Not really. Do I feel lonely? No. Had I got nothing better to do? Well, not really, because I always have things to do. I just chose this. So why did I choose? Curiosity. I chose it because I was curious, and I like to keep an open mind, and you never know. You don't know what you don't know, so let's go along for the ride and see. Once that was over, we settled down. I had to fill out a medical form, because this was in a medical centre, and I found that really difficult. I made lots of mistakes. When I say mistakes, I was writing down today's date as 19 something. We're in 2024. It hasn't been 19 something for a long time. I don't know what part of my brain was tickled by that form, but it was a bit weird. Anyway, things like that were happening. The form said something about, have you got any disabilities? And I actually answered, I don't know. Again, because I actually don't know. And then I kind of tried to rub that out and put a thing. It was just awkward. So I started to feel more and more awkward. By this time, I'd also realised that I'd changed chairs, actually, because I sat down initially on an office swivelly chair, and this was a room that was in a kitchen on a more slippy floor. I think actually now I'm saying that I can't remember, but I felt the chair was wobbly too much, was sort of in danger of going out from under me and I'd fall on the floor, and I didn't want to get hurt. I've got to ride my bike back. So I got up and changed to another chair. But then I found this other chair was squeaky, and I was literally becoming very internally focused on my movements, and that every time I moved a tiny inch, the chair would squeaking. And it's not that I found that embarrassing as such. I just found it awkward to have every breath I took or every movement of my body magnified by this chair that seemed to be announcing it to everybody. And also the chair wasn't very comfortable, so I moved again. So by this time I'm on my third chair. Then the meeting starts and I realise I'm on another chair that's squeaky, and I hate this chair. This is awful. Actually roll on a little bit longer in the meeting, and it was a bit of an awkward start, because the facilitator wasn't a facilitator. They went out the room and left us to our own device, because this was a peer-led. So basically we do our own thing, and I found that hard to comprehend. I didn't really know what was going on, but the chair thing was still bothering me, and so it got to a point where I just had to say, and I did say, I can't carry on in this chair. This chair is really annoying me. And everybody in the room who's all my peers with the neurodiversity going on situations were really good, and they identified a chair that was different to the ones that I'd had before. I felt like this chair was going to be a good fit for me, and we made that happen, and it was. So that got rid of the chair problem. Hallelujah. So I guess from that point on, I should have said this this peer support thing was great because my peers supported me. I felt great. I had a chair that was actually comfortable and not squeaking every moment. But by then I felt a bit ridiculous for getting emotionally dysregulated over a chair, because this Garmin watch had gone off by that point and told me that my heart was having a meltdown basically, and that I needed to do some breathing and calm myself and whatever. So I was in a dysregulated state at that point. Noticing how I felt with the chair and then having the chair situation out of the way, it left me in a place where I could actually start to understand that I'm actually getting a little bit triggered in other ways. Although at the time, during the meeting, I wasn't quite sure what was going on and why this was happening. I knew during the meeting that I felt confused about the whole format and the lack of rules, the lack of structure, and that the person who I thought was going to be the facilitator, this is the person who worked at the centre, was coming in and then going out. They'd come in and they'd give us some information or tell us something, make some suggestions, and then they'd go out again, and then they'd come back again, or somebody else would. It was difficult. It led me into, I noticed that I was dissociating quite a lot. I was really struggling to stay present in this group. There were a few other things too. There was a little comment about how it's really good to have a neurodiverse women's group because women present differently to men. And I always find that a bit of a trigger, to be fair, because if anything, I present like a neurodiverse man, not how I look, but how my autism is like a typical, you'd say an Asperger's man back in the day. That's how I am. I get quite, I am quite like that. And so I felt a little bit, again, like I wasn't fitting in, like I was a bit different, like something wrong with me, because actually, no, that's not right. And the last thing I want to do in any group, because I can already come across as a bit aggressive and maybe abrasive because of my tone of voice, my flat tone that happens, is I don't want to keep saying, well, no, that's not right. No, that's not me, because it's sort of, it interrupts the flow and it puts too much attention on me. So I let that one park, but by that time I was a bit triggered, plus the chair. So that's two things, plus the lack of rules. So that's 3 things. So it's all coming up, bubbling up inside of me. The newness of the situation also did have me on edge, and of course the fact that I was already a little exhausted because I'd come in on my bike. I'd already done this bike ride there and back again, so this was now the 3rd leg, if you like, of a 4-leg journey. And so that was also playing a part in my social battery, if you like, but that by itself wouldn't trigger me. So that's not the thing. It's not just that it's a new group, it's these other things. And I'm glad I recognised that, because I think that's really important. By the time the group was wrapping up, we'd actually got into our flow, which is not untypical of a neurodiverse group, that it takes us a long while to warm up, and then once we're warmed up we can't stop. So we're on a roll here, it's all going well. But we broke the group at about 12, which is when it was supposed to be, and I went back on my bike. That went okay, and then I came home, and I noticed when I was at home in the quiet space that I was totally exhausted by that, absolutely exhausted. And I also was feeling a little sad and dysregulated. I made myself about 3 cups of tea, and then I thought maybe I should go to bed, but I couldn't sleep. I just couldn't. There was just some agitation, almost like, when you have children in the lead up to a big event and they get themselves so wound up that they're just, going to have a meltdown. I felt a bit like that, but without the emotional meltdown part. But I did feel sad. I went out and did some gardening, which is nice. And when I was gardening, I had this sort of momentary insight of, why does everything I try leave me feeling like I can't keep myself safe? I was starting to mess with this idea, or think about this idea of, I have these good ideas, then I've maybe overdone it. Why did I ride to this event? Should it have been better to go in the car? Because 2 new things in a week, is that too much? Why am I even going to a social event? Maybe I can't ever socialize. There was lots and lots of things like that were really sort of going around in my head, and making me feel quite sad about myself, because I have this history of trying and doing new things and enduring, because I have a huge tolerance for bad treatment because of how life has been before, and especially when I wasn't sure how I functioned. I always feel like I have to hurt myself, or the world has to hurt me before I realise, oh God, that's not a good idea. And I don't mean in a traditional self-harm way, but I do mean in a subconscious self-harm way. It's like, well, you've got to bang against the sides before you think, oh, this isn't right. So I did feel pretty bad, but I did some gardening. I tried to get the mental jiggles out with a bit of physical activity, took the dog for a walk, and then I felt very physically tired as well as the mentally, and that was that. But then came the nightmares. So I had what I thought was not a bad night's sleep, but when I woke up I realized my body battery hadn't really charged. So that's another Garmin feature. It tells me basically how restful my sleep has been and whether I've topped myself up. It wasn't. I was starting this new day on half empty already, so very much lower than I wanted. I was feeling dysregulated. I lost my keys, so I was supposed to leave early for work, or I wanted to, and I got up, I got everything ready, I opened the car with the car keys, put all the stuff in the car, and then went to say goodbye to my husband and do the last check. Couldn't find the car keys again. And what had happened is I was wearing a sweater, a jumper with a pocket in, and then I had a top, like a coat thing with pockets in, and I kept checking the outer pockets to see if my keys were in there, and everywhere else didn't find them. They're actually in the inner pocket. So it was just an oversight of mine, but it cost me 20 minutes and also my sanity, because then I left the house feeling really bad. There's roadworks going on at the top of our street, and I ended up knocking into one of the, just enough of the barrier that it sort of pushed the wing mirror in on the passenger side, and then I was just in a bit of a mess really, and I broke down in tears. Sorted everything out, no big drama, nothing permanent, but it just showed me how close to boiling everything was. Back to the nightmares. The nightmare I had was one of the classic nightmares I have when I'm dysregulated, and it's about being in a war. So everything, it's a bit like this scenario was I was out in the fields or out in nature, which was really nice. There was lots of other people around, and then all of a sudden over the hill you get this sense that the atmosphere is changing and that there's a threat approaching. And so everybody starts scrambling, trying to find somewhere to hide to avoid the snipers and the onslaught of battle that's commencing. So this is all my dream, by the way. So I then spent the majority of the night trying to hide and escape and find tunnels and climb over fences and just get away. So it was very much a trying to escape being gunned down or imprisoned, which definitely says something about my mental state and about the fact that I actually was quite deeply triggered by some of the things that were happening along at the social group in that whole situation. So that left me wondering, what do I do now? Definitely wondering again, is socializing too exhausting for me? Should I just give up and not do this group again? I then had to go, I've then been to work for a couple of days, and it was a busy couple of days at work with lots going on. So there wasn't really much time to process, in depth my feelings, but now I have had time to process it, and I've realised a few things. So it was quite useful really. So exploring my feelings about what had transpired earlier in the week, the bike ride, etc. The bike ride I can definitely put down. So what's happened to me in the past is that I would do a lot of physical activity because I've recognised how much joy and how regulating to my nervous system exercise is, especially quite hard exercise. And bearing in mind that for the majority of my life, I have been very fit and very capable of doing 2 hours on the bike or whatever, swimming or whatever. Like I've been very capable of doing that. So I can tolerate a lot of exercise and it does me well. But so the bike part, I realised, was absolutely nothing to do with this. It wasn't triggering me at all. That was probably one of the things that kept me going, even though it made me very physically tired. So it did drain my physical battery. But this, what I was going through, what I was dysregulated around, was emotional. It's all my feelings. I realised that I'd assumed that this new group that I was joining, would feel safe and accommodating from the outset, and that I'd feel comfortable and relaxed being there. And that's a big assumption to make when you've never been there before and there's so much new, and I'm so specific in what makes me feel those things. I came to the conclusion that no group, no amount of facilitating and rules could take away all of that or provide me with that unique what I need to have those boxes ticked. there are some things that could have been ran a little bit better or a little bit more in alignment with the general neurodiverse needs, like, you know, the agenda, the rules, the structure, the whatever. Those sort of things generally make all neurodiverse people feel a bit safer, but me in particular, I find that triggering when there's no structure. And I could have also read a little bit more or asked a few questions before signing up about how the group would go, so I could have took some, I can take some responsibility for how dysregulated I feel, that I had the opportunity but didn't take it to find out more about how this would pan out. But like I said, I realised that there's some other structural and functional things that could have perhaps gone better that day as well. But the majority of the triggering and the upset that I was feeling was about me, and it was about some of the trauma and the triggers that I have that existed before this group and that will carry on existing until I resolve those situations or become or grow in my awareness. So it was really interesting and valuable to go to a group that sort of triggered me in a way that I could then learn a little bit more about myself, although it's never a pleasant feeling. So I realised that working and sitting with my feelings a bit more and untangling, well, what's mine to deal with, what's under my control and what's not, what's my reaction to a bit of a dysregulated environment that maybe I could give some feedback on, and what's, you know, just one of those things that if you keep going back it will eventually get a bit easier. So that's basically what I've been doing. And what I found challenging about the day in particular, I felt that the room was small and cramped, so that always makes me feel a bit on edge because I'm a clumsy person. I have very bad proprioception and interoception, so I find it hard to know where my body is in space and how to accommodate the space inside my body. So being in a tight space, it's not so much, I don't get claustrophobic. I'm quite happy sometimes being in a tight space, but it's understanding the space, having a cohesive narrative around a space really matters to me. Why am I here? What is this space for? What is it telling me? How is the ambience making me feel? And I felt that wasn't happening for me in this space at that time. And I'll have to add there that the group was being run in a non-normal room because there was other things going on. So if I go back at another time, the chances are that we'll be in a nicer, bigger, better spaced room. I was also a bit dysregulated by giving this medical form to fill out. That kind of set me off kilter from the get-go. It would have been better to have that emailed to my house and done at home, where I have a support person, my husband, who can help me, or at least put it in perspective if I couldn't do it. I found it difficult with people coming in and going out at different times and me not knowing who they are and what they do and whether they're one of us or one of them, you know, that kind of thing. It was all very difficult. There wasn't any formal introductions. The host role being unclear was difficult, and the fact that while we did have, you know, the group was running between two times, there wasn't really a structure, and I found that really hard. And maybe it would have been easier if I'd have known there was no structure and had that sort of explicitly mentioned again. And again, I take responsibility for not reading that, but you don't know what you don't know, and this is what it's like to be neurodiverse, and this is what happens. You get dysregulated, and it can send the rest of your week out of kilter. There were some positives about the day. I found the day really open and friendly, that everybody meant well, and that people were really, really lovely, actually. I had some great chats, and it was nice to connect with some other people on the spectrum or who are going down that journey of self-discovery, and know that this is a safe space and a very accommodating space. And as I mentioned before, I was supported by them and in a non-judgmental way to get a chair, and there was a feeling that people understood how complicated and how difficult that was for me to spend my time sitting on this. So I feel like in a group of neurotypical people, that would have been just like, oh, nothing much of a problem, or it would have been made a joke of or made light of. But it was they were really caring the way we responded to that. There was food and drink available at all time and lots of choice, so that was kind of nice. And we also had fidget toys to play with, which I did get into. I wasn't really for the mindful colouring. I've realised that I don't like colouring in, and that could also be that I find it really hard to keep within the lines, and I don't actually find anyway, that's just not for me. So what now? What did I learn from all of that, and what am I going to do with it? Well, after a couple of chats around the family and whatever, there's this bit of feeling like, well, why do I put myself through this? And that question was asked of me by my family. It's like, well, don't go again then if it was so bad. And I totally understand where people are coming from when they say that, because it sounds like this was horrendous and that I should never go again because I was so upset by it all. However, like I've said, once there's some of that bad experience that is me, and it's telling me something about myself, not about the group. So I have to, if I want to live a rich and fulfilling life and enjoy and explore this world creatively and have my curiosity piqued by doing different things, then this is going to happen all the time. So what I do feel is that I'm not quite there yet with my life skills. I need to build on my life skills, and so if I just don't go, I'm not going to learn anymore. I'm not going to practice any new skills. So I feel that what I need to do now is try again. I do need to go back. I need to go back with a different mindset, with some different boundaries, some different understanding about my boundaries, about what I will tolerate and what I won't, what I can do, what's within my power to make myself feel a bit more comfortable in that environment, and to have a more even platform from which I can assess whether this group is going to be something that I do long term, or whether I just give it a couple more goes and then let it fizzle out. But my gut feeling now is that this could actually be a very big positive for me, in terms of self-development and growth, and also in terms of being able to help others with their self-acceptance and feeling heard and supported, and that's important to me. It's an important value of mine that I am a member of society. I'm not one of those who likes to drop out of society. I like to be able to be there for people, and to help make society feel safer for everybody, by being somebody who will hold that space and stand up and be available emotionally. So yeah, I think I'm going to give it another go. I'm certainly going to give the bike riding another go, but this has been quite a growth week for me, and yeah, I'm glad I can share it with you. I hope your week has been fun too.